So we're in the home stretch. One more week until the election. Not that we'll likely know who won on election night, but at least it's almost over. So one more week. And I believe early voting here in Texas ends on Friday. So if you wanted to early vote, you have until the end of the week. You can wait until election day. On election day, if you need to miss class to vote, it is an excused absence, so don't worry. If you're like, hey, Dr. Trey, I need to miss your class to vote, go vote. It's really more important, so keep that in mind. Also, research papers are due 2 weeks from today in Blackboard by 11:59 p.m., so make sure you get them submitted. If you want me to look at a rough draft, or you have questions about the paper, I'm more than happy to take a look and give you feedback if you want. Are there any questions on the paper? Sounds good. Okay. So today we are going to start on Congress, which again is good timing considering the whole controversial Supreme Court appointment by the Senate. So there are some experts who will try to argue that Congress, the legislative branch, is actually the most powerful. And there's some validity to that. So today we're going to talk about representation, elections, and a little bit on the various committees and pieces of Congress. So I always like to start off with a joke by one of my favorite authors, Mark Twain. Suppose you were an idiot, and suppose you were Congress, but I repeat myself. It's funny for two reasons. One, I think it kind of sums up how people feel about Congress. And two, he was making this joke in the 1800s. It tells you that people's unhappiness with Congress goes back quite a ways. So the American attitude towards Congress largely has been, yeah, whatever, unless they're not doing their jobs, and then we get annoyed with them. But I just like the idea of Mark Twain pointing out how ineffective Congress can be sometimes. So this is a bicameral legislature, meaning two chambers. We have the House of Representatives, and we have the Senate. The number of representatives is not fixed. So the size of the House has increased with the population. It's currently set at 435, although that number may go up because of the increase in population. So within another 20 years or so, we could be looking at 450 members in the House easily. The House is not a fixed number. It's based on population. The number of senators, however, has always been fixed at 2 per state. So it's 100 total. Now, there have been some questions about how fair is it to have a state like California only have 2 senators, a state like Wyoming also getting 2 senators, and the population of Wyoming is about the same of the population of LA County alone in California. And are the small states overrepresented? For now, there aren't any changes to the number in the Senate. Each chamber has its own set of requirements for office. To run in the House, you have to be 25. You have to have been a U.S. citizen for 7 years. You do not have to be a natural-born citizen. You just have to be a citizen. You could have grown up in Vietnam, come to the U.S., and if you're a citizen and you've been a citizen for 7 years, you can serve in the House of Representatives. And it's a 2-year term with the entire House of Representatives being re-elected every 2 years. So all 435 House seats are up for re-election in a week. For the Senate, you have to be at least 30. You have to have been a citizen for 9 years. And it's a 6-year staggered term. So only 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. So it's why Cruz was up for re-election in 2018, but John Cornyn wasn't up for re-election until this year. It's a sign so we can't try to replace the entire Senate at once. Theoretically, we could toss out every sitting member of the House and replace them all. We can't do that in this Senate. And in the House, they have to get things done right away. You only get 2 years. So you've got to get to work immediately, trying to solve the problem. You're also serving a very local, specific interest. You're representing the Texas 24th, or the Illinois 19th, or the California 7th. You're representing a small, specific local interest. With the Senate, because you're serving the entire state, you have to serve a larger, more diverse population. You have to take into consideration that the needs of the people in Austin are not going to be the same as the needs of the people in the Rio Grande Valley. The House can focus on very specific issues to their district. The Senate has to look at what's good for the entire state. And each member has to decide how they're going to represent their constituents. For some members, they see themselves as a delegate, so they will vote according to what their constituents want. They take their cues from their constituents. The problem with this is, what do you do if your constituents don't care about an issue? It can be hard to know how to vote if you're not getting any feedback from your constituents. Some members see themselves more as a trustee. They take the attitude of, I have the power to make the decisions that I think are best for you. They don't necessarily follow the wishes of their constituents. They make decisions based on what they think is the best policy. So this is problematic because they may not be paying enough attention to what their constituents want. So with the trustee representation, the only way we could really hold them accountable is to vote them out of office. Each representative has to pick which type of representation they want to do. And sometimes it's a mixed bag. Maybe they'll be paying more attention to issues they know impact voters in their area. Then they'll vote however they want on an issue they know the voters don't care about, like foreign policy. It's also helpful if the representative has the same racial, gender, ethnic, religious, or educational background. It promotes good representation. If you are living in a majority Hispanic district, but your representative is white, you aren't necessarily reflecting the community. So it's helpful to have a representative who has the same background, who maybe grew up in the community, who has ties to the area, who went to the local college, shares the same religious characteristics. So it is helpful to have the representation accurately reflecting the population. And we can hold our representatives accountable if we don't think they're doing what they need to do. If we get fed up with our member of the House, we can choose to not only vote for them, but choose not to even renominate them. A member of Congress who isn't doing their job will likely face a primary challenger, and they could lose. It's because of this that representatives will take into consideration our needs and wants. If they get 1,000 letters from their constituents saying, Congressman, we need you to vote yes on this, then they're going to take that into consideration because they don't want to lose re-election. This is especially important during an election year. You may see them changing their tune a little bit because they don't want to lose office. And they definitely don't want to lose their primary. That's incredibly embarrassing. If your own party won't support you, you're pretty much dead in the water. Here's the reality of the situation in Congress, though. It doesn't necessarily reflect the American population. Most members of Congress identify as Protestant. There are exceptions, of course, like Bernie Sanders, who is Jewish, Muslim representatives, and so on. But religiously, they do still tend to be Christian. In 2018, we saw some uptick in minority representation. Minorities are still significantly underrepresented. 9% of Congress is African American. About 13.3% of the population is African American. 7% of Congress is Latino. 17.5% of the population in general is Latino. 3% of Congress is Asian American. 5.5% of the American population is Asian American. So minorities are still underrepresented in Congress. It's getting better, but it's still an issue. In terms of gender, Nancy Pelosi became the first female Speaker of the House in 2006. And after the 2018 election, she became Speaker of the House again. She is the first and only woman to serve as Speaker of the House. We also saw more women getting elected to Congress in 2018. 106 women are currently serving in the House of Representatives and 25 in the Senate. While that's still pretty low compared to the national average, it is the highest number of women in Congress ever. So more women are running for Congress and more women are winning. A fun fact about Congress: up until 1993, female senators were not allowed to wear pants on the floor of the Senate. Yeah, they had to wear a skirt. So, there you go. It's important to understand that the Speaker of the House is important for two reasons. One, she is the leader of the House of Representatives. Two, under the 25th Amendment, she's essentially second in line. So if the president were to die, resign, or be impeached, it would go to the vice president and then the Speaker of the House. Constitutionally, this is a very important position. So the fact that Nancy Pelosi is the current Speaker of the House means she has the highest position for a woman in government right now. Also, people were talking about what would happen if we had to postpone this election. What would have happened is after January, Trump would not be president. It would actually go to Nancy Pelosi because neither the president nor the vice president would serve in that capacity until the next election. So hypothetically, if we don't know who won before Inauguration Day, or the election had to be postponed, Nancy Pelosi would become the interim president. So, kind of funky, but it's technically possible. Okay. Most members of Congress have a legal background. It makes sense. We want people who are making the laws to know the law. So a lot of them have served as trial lawyers, prosecutors, judges, etc. A lot of them have ties to various businesses and industries like oil, IT, natural gas, etc. Which again makes sense. If you work for Amazon and you don't think Congress is doing enough to help your business, you might be hired to run and try to fix things from within Congress. Over 90% of the members of Congress have a college degree or higher, and more than a third have a law degree. What this tends to mean is that Congress doesn't reflect the American public. They are better educated, and they are wealthier. So it's hard to feel like Congress is taking our needs seriously when they can't seem to put together a second stimulus package and it's a bunch of millionaires arguing over funding. So it's kind of hard for us to feel sometimes like Congress is actually on our side, that they actually care about our needs. And there are some examples of that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whatever you're feeling for her, she was a bartender, so she does understand the needs of her constituents. She knows what it's like to be a she's an exception to the rule in Congress. One of the few exceptions to the rule. Okay, so I know this chart is hard to read, but let me just break this down for you. 51% of Congress is made up of millionaires. They only make up 5% of the general population. 77% of Congress is white men. They only make up 31% of the general population. Women only make up about 20% of Congress. They're 51% of the population, broadly speaking. And 67% of the members of Congress are over the age of 55. But only 28% of the population is over the age of 55. What does this mean? Well, it means Congress is wealthier, whiter, and older than the general population. And because there is no age limit, we do have members of Congress in their late 80s. Senator Feinstein from California is 85 or 86 years old. She'll be about 90 when her term expires, because she was just reelected in 2018. It's not uncommon for members of Congress to die in office. They just keep getting reelected, and that's it. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is somewhere in her 70s, and I think Mitch McConnell is as well. I mean, our representation does tend to skew quite a bit older. We've got two men in their 70s running to be president of the United States. Which is why people were paying a lot of attention to the VP debates, because hypothetically, either President Trump or possibly would-be President Biden could die in office. Okay. So part of the job of the members of Congress is to respond to their constituents' needs. It can be hard to do so, especially because the average House member has over 700,000 constituents. And if you've got two senators for the entire state of Texas, that's several million emails and phone calls coming in every single day. It's hard for the staff to keep up with these large numbers of emails and phone calls. To try to deal with this, members of Congress have created their own website. If you go to house.gov or senate.gov, you can look at the web page for each member of Congress. They're also on social media. They're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They've also set up e-newsletters for frequently asked questions. People can get information on the status of current legislation. Let them know what their representative is working on. Let them know when their representative will next be in the district. And that can help somewhat with the volume of emails that they get. But there's still a lot of information that they get. What this means is about 49% of House staff and 41% of Senate staff is not in Washington, D.C. They're in the home districts or the home state. A lot of them aren't working in Washington, D.C. They're working in Austin, or Weslaco, or Chicago. Because if you contact your member of Congress, most of the time you're calling district office first. If you call Washington, D.C., you may not get an answer. If you call your local office, you're more likely to get a response. But it's the staff who will talk to the constituents. Help them out with things like applying for Social Security or disability benefits, issues with immigration status, personal matters that someone just might need a little bit of help on. They're going to be more responsive on issues that they know are of a concern to their constituents on the state or local level. In Texas, they're going to focus on issues like the oil industry, agriculture, and so on. So they're going to be getting more contact from their constituents on these issues, and they're going to be more responsive. Usually, if you email like Senator Cornyn, you're not getting an email directly from him, you're getting it from a staff member who sends out emails on his behalf. They can be very, very helpful if you find yourself in a crisis. To give you a personal example, in 2007, I was getting ready to do a study abroad in Madrid one summer for my master's degree. And I'd applied for my passport months in advance, but there was some delay at the passport office, so I'm waiting for my passport. It gets to be about a week before I'm supposed to leave, and I still don't have my passport. I called my representative's office. I was living in the Illinois 19th at the time. They contacted someone in Washington, D.C. My passport was issued the next day, and it arrived by FedEx the day after that. So they got on it. They hopped to it. They were like, she has this issue, and we're going to fix it. So they got me my passport. Of course, I was also kind of a pain in the neck for the Congress member. I was always emailing him, so maybe he thought, hey, if I can get rid of her for a couple of weeks, why not? They did it. They took care of it. If I tried to do it on my own, I probably wouldn't have gotten anywhere. If you run into a problem like that, or a grandparent who's having trouble with Social Security, contact the local office. They'll try to do something to help you out, find the right person. They have numbers that we don't. They can reach people higher up the food chain that we wouldn't necessarily be able to. All right, in terms of elections, what we tend to see is that over 90% of incumbents win re-election. This isn't necessarily because people love their representatives, although that is sometimes the case. A lot of it is because the races just aren't competitive. In 2014, only 49 out of 435 House races were considered competitive, meaning that they were decided by 10% or less. So only 49 out of 435 seats being competitive, not great. The incumbents tend to win by a higher margin than when they were first running for office. On average, the margin of victory for an incumbent senator is 22% and is 35% in the House. That's where you get those elections where the incumbent wins with like 75% of the vote. And a lot of this is because of gerrymandering. Because the state legislature draws up the election map, the party that controls the state legislature basically controls the districts. That's why in Illinois there was a literal Nazi running for a seat near Chicago because it's such a blue district. No other Republican would run, which is ridiculous when you think about it. So one of the things that's been suggested for how do we fix this problem of the lack of competition is to introduce term limits. Right now, a member of Congress can keep running until they lose, quit, or die in office. If we introduce term limits, it does increase competition because there's no incumbent. Also, research has found that women who run in a seat where there's no incumbent are just as likely to win as men. So if there's no incumbent, women are more likely to win office. Same with minorities. So if we did put in term limits, we could see more women and more minority representation in Congress. And the economy does play a role sometimes in which party gets control of Congress. The party that's in power tends to be punished if the economy is not doing well. In 2008, with the collapse of the economy, Republicans across the country lost re-election. Democrats took control of the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. So right now, it's unclear if Democrats are going to hold on to the House and if they can take back control of the Senate. It's up in the air. It's possible, but it's up in the air. And there's a couple of Senate seats that are really close that they weren't expecting, including in Arizona. A Democrat may win in Arizona for the first time, God knows how long. So again, it doesn't help that the districts are drawn up by the parties. In a handful of states, it's an independent commission that draws up the districts. And in those states, the elections are competitive. So if we set it up so that the state legislature wasn't in control, but an independent, nonpartisan commission, we could have more competitive elections. Incumbents wouldn't necessarily feel like, well, I don't really have to try because no one's going to run against me and I'm guaranteed to win. So that would help a bit if we could actually make the races competitive. One of the ways members of Congress make sure they get reelected is to get as much funding as possible for their district or state. This is what they mean when they talk about pork barrel legislation. Someone will attach an amendment to a bill that gives their district funding. It can be something like improving mass transit, building new parks or schools, something that makes the member look good, especially in a re-election year. In 2010, there were a little over 11,000 earmarks that were worth $32 billion. So sometimes these are legitimate earmarks that are needed, and sometimes they're an absolute waste of money. And the infamous bridge to nowhere is a very good example of this. Every year, Congress has to appropriate money to take care of the federal highway system. So representatives and senators from Alaska in 2005 had the bright idea of attaching an amendment that would have given Alaska $2 billion to build a bridge connecting an island that had almost no one living on it to a town of 8,000 people that was already being serviced by a 5-minute ferry ride. They're basically going to build a bridge in the middle of nowhere to connect no one to nothing. Then Hurricane Katrina came through and the project got scrapped. But that's the kind of ridiculous funding that sometimes happens in Congress. You don't need a bridge when people are already getting a 5-minute ferry ride, but these things do happen. You'll also see members of Congress working to help with access to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and so on. They can play it up in their ads. They can talk about how they helped this constituent. And that constituent can be part of the ad and say, I was worried about getting access to my husband's Social Security benefits, but this representative helped me out. They can also introduce a private bill. Basically, that just means it's not debated. We don't really hear much about them. And usually they go to help foreign nationals get some kind of citizenship status. If you have someone from Thailand who has multiple businesses in the United States and needs help getting a green card, a private bill can do that for them. A lot of what they're doing is trying to make themselves look good to their constituents. Look at what I've done for you. Look at what I've done for the district. re-elect me, and I promise I'll keep doing this kind of work for you. All right, so within Congress, there needs to be leadership in chambers. The Speaker of the House is essentially the elected leader of the majority party. Keep in mind, we don't directly, of course, elect the Speaker of the House. We do get to choose who the majority party is. And then the members of the majority party pick the Speaker of the House. Because Democrats were given control of the House of Representatives in 2018, Democrats chose to make Nancy Pelosi Speaker of the House. And the party that's in the minority does need elected leaders to help rally the minority party. So in the House, the minority leader is Kevin McCarthy for the Republicans. In the Senate, it's Chuck Schumer for the Democrats. So you still need an elected leader even when you're in the majority party. There's also the role of the whip. Not a literal whip, though I'm sure sometimes the leadership would like those. This is the people who line up the party members on a vote, coordinate strategy with the leadership, and count the different votes. What we're looking at is, do we have enough votes to move this forward? Are the people in our party behind the leadership? They could go to Nancy Pelosi and say, Madam Speaker, we have the votes, we can move this to the floor. Or, Madam Speaker, we don't have the votes, we still agree to compromise. To keep leadership from trying to bring it to a when there's enough support. These are the individuals that keep the party in line. They go to members and say, you know, Speaker Pelosi really wants through, or you owe us for this, now it's your turn to repay the favor. Within the Senate, constitutionally, the Vice President is the formal head of the Senate. Most of the time, he's not there. He has other work he has to do. So, the majority party will elect a president pro tempore, basically run the Senate when the president is not there. So he, so far, is elected by the majority party. The current president pro tempore is called. If Democrats take control of the Senate, it might be Chuck Schumer, it might be someone else. So this person runs the Senate when the vice president isn't there, just most of the time. Usually the vice president is only in the Senate to cast a tiebreaker vote if they deadlock. So the Speaker of the House is a very important position. Not only are they the leader of the House, but they are in the line of succession for the presidency. Under the 25th Amendment, if a president dies, is impeached, or resigns from office, it goes to the vice president and then the Speaker of the House. Constitutionally, they fill a very important role, not only as lead part of the legislative branch, but possibly taking over the executive branch. Nancy Pelosi is in a very, very important position right now. as is Mitch McConnell, because the way it goes is it goes to the vice president, then the Speaker of the House, then the President pro tempore, and all the way down through the cabinet. So you gotta, hope that they stay healthy and don't get into fights or anything. Oh, did you guys see what was happening with Mitch McConnell the other day? His hands were really, really bruised and dark, so people were wondering if he's killed. And he hasn't said anything, but it was a little weird. It looked like he'd maybe fallen or hurt himself or something, so a little scary to see that. Okay, so another important part of Congress is the various committees. There's a standing committee, which is permanent, meaning they exist from one legislative session to the next. And they can propose and write legislation. The two very important standing committees are the House Ways and Means and the Senate Finance Committee. And these committees determine how they're going to fund new legislation. And they're in charge of things like taxes, trade, Social Security, and Medicare. It's the standing committees that will introduce the new budget. Figure out how much money each agency is going to get. How are we going to pay for tax cuts? How are we going to pay for healthcare? Things like that. Again, they do exist from one session to the next. They are not dissolved. A select committee is not a permanent committee. It's fairly temporary. They are used to investigate an issue or to hold a hearing. So an example includes the Senate Watergate Committee in 1973. They were looking into the attempted break-in of the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex, the subsequent cover-up, and the abuse of power by President Nixon. It was dissolved when Nixon resigned from office. Other select committees include the House Select Committee on Benghazi, investigating the destruction of our embassy and the killing of our ambassador in Benghazi, Libya in 2011. The House Select Committee on Hunger in 1984 to tackle global famine problems. And more recently, the House Select Committee on Homeland Security. Again, these committees are usually not permanent, although sometimes they can become permanent. The House Select Committee on Homeland Security was set up to oversee the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. So once that cabinet was created, they made the House Select Committee a permanent standing committee. Occasionally they do become permanent. But usually they're looking into a particular issue, like the 9/11 Commission, looking into how did this happen, what were the failures of our intelligence community, and so on. Also the Warren Commission that was set up to investigate the assassination of President John Kennedy. Sometimes the select committees will publish a report that we have access to. Anyone can read the House 9/11 Commission's report. Anyone can read the Warren Commission. Some of that's publicly available. There's also joint committees. They're not allowed to present legislation, but they can work together on things like armed services, where there's members from both the House and the Senate. There's also a conference committee. They'll try to compromise on legislation. They try to reconcile the differences between different versions of House and Senate bills. So if two bills are introduced, one in the House, one in the Senate, you have to combine them into one bill that gets voted on. So conference committees are very important during a split legislature. So they're needed now because Democrats control the House and Republicans the Senate. Unfortunately, because the parties aren't working together very well, the conference committees aren't able to get very far. And members don't necessarily want to be on them because they're a giant headache. We've got Democrats in the House putting together a proposal for a second round of stimulus checks, and Republicans in the Senate figuring about how much and should we, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not actually getting anything done. It's clear that we really probably do need another stimulus check to be sent out, but they can't seem to agree on the language or how much or anything like that. And also, I was reading an article a little bit ago that said this recession is worse on women than men because women tend to work in service industries, and those are being hit harder because of the shutdown. So they're actually calling it a C-session. It's a women's recession. So women are feeling the impact harder than men. Okay, so who's on what committee and who's in charge is decided by a couple of different things. Usually you have to have seniority to be the chair. Also, the longer you serve in Congress, the better your committee assignment. If you're a brand new member of Congress, you're not getting on the Armed Services Committee. You're probably getting the Sub-Agricultural Committee on Fruit, Vegetables, or something like that. You're not getting a very glamorous assignment. There are some exceptions to this. Sometimes the chair of a committee is decided because someone has demonstrated loyalty to the party or because they're damn good at fundraising. If you can raise millions of dollars for the Democrats or the Republicans, they'll give you pretty much any assignment that you want. You're pretty much guaranteed to get what you want. The new members of Congress do sometimes get a better committee if their seat is competitive. For example, if you have a Democrat winning in a district that's usually held by the Republicans, the Democrats are going to want to give that person a good committee so they have a better chance of getting reelected. Sometimes, if it's a very competitive district, a new member of Congress will actually get a good committee assignment. Usually they have to work their way up the ladder. They have to put in their time on a committee and then request a transfer after they've been in Congress 2 years, 4 years, etc. There used to be more bipartisanship. There used to be more calling of experts on both sides, allowing for the minority party on the committees to have a say. It doesn't really exist anymore. You don't necessarily hear arguments from both sides. And the minority party is usually shut out of the discussion. We saw this happening with the Senate Judiciary Committee, where the Republicans basically told the Democrats on that committee, this is inevitable, so sit down, shut up, and let's just get her confirmed on the court. And there wasn't much the Democrats could do about that because they don't control the majority in the Senate. So they could complain about it, but they couldn't really do much more than complain about it. So the party that controls the majority tends to tell the minority to sit down, shut up, and get out of our way. So other important parts of Congress include the 11,500 staffers. Staffers work for individual members of Congress, and they are incredibly important because they can draft legislation, organize research, and most importantly, they keep track of the schedules. They make sure their representative or senator knows when there's a floor vote, when the committees are meeting, when they have a meeting with a lobbyist or constituent. They don't want the member being double booked, right, or not showing up for an important vote. The members of Congress don't necessarily contact each other directly. Senator Warren isn't going to be calling Senator Duckworth directly. Someone from Senator Warren's office will call someone from Senator Duckworth's office, and the two staff members will arrange the meeting. Because the members don't necessarily know their own schedule, but their staff does. You don't see members directly calling each other, you see their staff calling each other. And sometimes they offer summer internships for college students, not probably next year unless things get better. But if you're interested in that in the future, you can look it up and see if you can spend the summer working in Washington, seeing how Congress works. In addition to the personal staff, there's two different important staff agencies. The first is the Congressional Research Service. So if a member of Congress isn't quite sure about a piece of legislation, you can ask the Research Service to give them the arguments for and against the proposed legislation. So they can be better informed before they go to vote. There's also the Governmental Accountability Office that allows Congress to investigate financial and administrative affairs of executive branch agencies like various cabinet departments. They can help them figure out what's going on in the Department of Agriculture or Education. If money is being misspent, or there's complaints about the head of an agency, Congress can look into that. And Congress can say, guys, we need to fix this. This isn't working. Within Congress, there's also caucuses. You'll see groups of representatives and senators with common interests, goals, or social characteristics coming together to promote legislation, encourage hearings, and ask for favorable treatment from agencies. Two of the biggest caucuses include the Congressional Black Caucus that tries to deal with civil rights issues, issues of police brutality, and so on, and the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues. Caucuses do sometimes cross party lines. You will see Democrats and Republicans serving together in these caucuses because they have more in common than they do not, right? So sometimes they'll come together and say, look, we don't always agree on this issue, but we do agree on this. So let's work together and try to get this done for our group. Let's try to fix this problem. Any questions? Any questions online? Okay. So just a reminder again that the research paper is due in 2 weeks by 11:59 p.m. in Blackboard. And again, if you want me to look at a rough draft or section of your paper, you can email it to me and I'll give you feedback. If for some reason the Dropbox isn't working, let me know and I'll take a look at it. But remember, research papers are due in 2 weeks. And it sneaks up on students sometimes. Like, I have forever. Oh no, it's the deadline. So yeah, just keep that in mind. We're going to wrap up Congress on Thursday. We're going to talk about how a bill is passed when they're actually doing their jobs, some of the special powers given to the Senate, and the pros and cons of term limits. Read the second half of Chapter 12 for Thursday. If you have any questions, you can email me or call or text my cell phone. That's it for today. If you haven't voted yet, make sure you vote. Yes, I will keep nagging you into voting. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see those of you online on class on Thursday and some of you online